of choices. Implicitly, you made them explicitly, you made all these types of choices in your day, from whether or not, first of all, you're going to hit the snooze when you wake up. And if you're like me, I hit mine this morning to give me an extra 10 or 15 minutes. We make choices every day. We make choices as to what we're going to wear. We make choices as to whether we're going to brush our teeth or not. And for those of you on the front row, thank you. And so we make many choices every day. You make a choice at whether or not you're going to post something on Facebook and what you're going to post and how you're going to post it, because you don't want to post it in the wrong way to make other people judge you in a certain way. And then you make the choice whether or not you're going to like somebody's post, because you know it's your friend and you know that you really don't like their post, but if you don't like their post, they're not going to like you for not liking their post that you really don't like. You following me? We make choices every day. You make choices at work. You make choices with your kids. Sometimes you make choices to save your kids' lives because you really want to do the opposite to them. And you make choices every day. You make choices in every area of your life. You make choices as a married couple. You make choices as parents. You make choices at the workplace. You make choices at the drive-thru. We make thousands of choices every day. And no matter what the choice is, our choices are made in one way or the other. And this is why I believe one of the ways we make choices. Not all of our choices, but we make choices, write this in your notes, based on what's required of us. That's just one of the many ways that we make choices. We make choices based on what's required of us. We thankfully don't make all of our choices this way, but we have this innate ability to just make the choice based on what is required of all of us. We make choices at work to what we're going to do based on, hey, the minimal requirement to keep my job is this. So I'm going to only write this many reports, or I'm going to make this many sales calls, or I'm going to turn in this many things, or I'm going to hit my quota, just my quota, because that's the minimum requirement of what I'm obligated to do to keep my job. We also do that bare minimum with our kids. You know, I like the reason I don't reverse the locks on their room to make them stay in their bedroom until 6 a.m. is because there's probably a law somewhere that says, as a parent, the minimum I have to do is not do that. And we make choices based on these bare minimum requirements. And a lot of these bare minimums are set for us by law. Like there are bare minimums for driving. Speeding is an easy one to say, hey, as a good moral driver, there's a bare minimum that you have to do, that you have to drive 45 miles an hour in this stretch of street. That's the bare minimum that our government has put to say, hey, this is the bare minimum for being in right standing with the city, with each other, on how you do that. We also have bare minimums in other parts of the law. It's how the minimal requirement to be a good moral citizen and treat each other with a sense of morality. Now, Jesus, when he came to this earth, he came to this nation of Israel who had a set of bare minimums. They had a set of bare minimums that they were given when they exited out of Egypt, and we had this great exodus. And because they had never operated as a nation before, they had never operated together in a civil society, God knew at that time that he had to give and instruct the people on how to live in a right standing with him, that these are bare minimums, and we get the 10 Commandments. There's part of those, hey, if you want to have a right standing with God, these are the bare minimums for that. And then they had all these bare minimums of how to relate with each other. And that these are the bare minimums of how we exist as a society. And Jesus comes in the middle of this nation. And he begins to talk to these people. And he's addressed one day. And a Pharisee comes to him and says, Jesus, what's the most important bare minimum? What's the bare minimum that we all need to live by? What's the most important one of all these bare minimums that relate to God and relate to mankind? And Jesus says, I'm going to give you, he actually answers them, and he gives us two bare minimums that he kind of ties together, and he gives these, and he says, all of these other bare minimums that we have as laws, they hang on this. It's like they all are supported by these right here. And he answers this teacher this way. He goes, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? We have this in your notes. It's up on the screen. Jesus replied to this question, love the Lord your God. And at that moment, all the Israelites probably could have quoted the rest of it because they all grew up memorizing what they call the Shema, which is this really declaration of our devotion to our God. And this is the most important thing, to love the Lord your God with all, not some, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. But Jesus doesn't stop there. And he goes, this is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Which if you think in metaphors, you like, okay, if that's the first and greatest and the second is like it, then this is almost equally as important if we're talking about this. That Jesus says, if you're going to love God, then this is what this means. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. So in order to love God, you have to love others. In order to love God, loving others is non-subjective. You have to do it. You have to do it. And he goes, all the law, which is all those bare minimum requirements that we gave you all, that God gave us in the history, all the law, and it doesn't matter if it's the religious law, it doesn't matter if it's the law of our land, all the law hangs on these two things. And it's not just the law of them, but it's also the law of the prophets, which are the things that God's calling his nation and calling his people back to him. All those things hang on these two commands. They're supported by this. And then Jesus later in his teaching, before his disciples, he sends his disciples off and he goes to heaven and he actually goes to the cross. They don't even know he's about ready to go to the cross. And he gives them one reminder really of this idea, but he takes it to another level. And in this, he reduces that bare minimum. He says, a new command I give you. Love one another. And then he says this is how I want you to love, as I've loved. How are we to love? As he's loved. How are we to love our spouse? As he's loved us. Especially husbands, we love our wives as Christ has loved us. Wives, how do you love your husbands? As Christ loves you. How do we love our kids? As Christ loves us. How do we love our neighbors? As Christ has loved us. How do we love our coworker that we don't really like? As Christ has loved us. He goes, as I've loved you, so you can make the choice every day whether or not you're going to do this. No. As I've loved you, this is a requirement, so you must love one another. And as Christ followers, sometimes we forget that we don't have a choice in the matter. Because in order to identify ourselves with Christ, in order to let God know in one way that we love him, the requirement is that we love everyone else. So in order to show God I love him, it's really not in my words, it's in my act towards you. To show God that I really love him, it's really in how I respond to the people around me that shows God that I love him. So when I realize what I've received, that I've received the love of God, the best way for me to show God how much I appreciate I've received the love for God is not by coming to church. The best way for me to show God that I'm so grateful that I received his love and I want to respond to his love. It's not that I always sing songs and I only sing songs. It's that we love and we demonstrate that love that we've received to the others around us. And so this has been the bed that we have been building our big idea of off this entire series, and that's this. What does love require of us? That's the series' big idea. What does love require of me as a husband? What does love require of me as a spouse? What does love require of me as a child, or as a sibling, or as a coworker, as a boss, as an employee, as a neighbor? What does love require of me? And Paul, we've been looking at his list, at how he talks about love. And in his list, he gives a beautiful description that has been quoted time and time again by people in the marketplace, by people who don't even believe in God, that they use Paul's words to describe what love is, and it's because it was inspired by God, I believe. And Paul says this: love is patient. We talked about that in week 2. And then he goes, it's not only patient, but it's kind. And these two active responses in a positive way are how we respond in love. And then he flips the list. He says, okay, that we're done with talking about the positive, and now let's talk about the negative things. It does not, and we talked about this last week, it does not envy. It doesn't envy what other people have. It doesn't do that. And then he gives us these 3 words that I want to talk about today. It says, or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. Let's look at that word boast for a second. That word boast, I love it because it means to excessively talk about yourself. You've met people who have boasted, and it's just like, man, they cannot stop talking about their achievements. They can't stop talking about their high school award. And granted, it's been 40 years since they graduated from high school, but that basketball victory, man, nobody can beat that. They love to boast. And really, we love to boast because we really like to talk about ourselves, don't we? And have you ever caught yourself trying to one-up somebody else? You know what I'm talking about? They start talking about their story. I caught myself doing it this week. One of our pastors here was talking about an ice storm he went through, and I caught myself wanting to talk about my ice storm I went to. And you know what I tend to do? I kind of elevated some of the details, and really, I lied. Your pastor's a liar. Now, probably I could have had the data to prove it, but I felt this need to excessively talk about myself. And really, it's in all of us. And the reason we boast, and this is just me, okay, so this might not be true of you, but I think it's true for a lot of us, that I believe boasting communicates that something that we all think about ourselves. Is boasting really communicates that I really love me. That's what boasting communicates. That, man, of the two people, you're all about you when you boast. That when you talk about yourself excessively and you can't really talk about others and somebody else talks about their achievements, you're that great. That's great. But did you hear about the time that I did this? And then another thing is it's arrogant. Now, if boasting is excessively talking about yourself, then arrogance is exaggerating about yourself. It's really, you have an exaggerated opinion of who you really are, and really of how important you really are. You have this exaggerated sense of importance. And I love what the King James says, because I think the King James gives us a really good word illustration of arrogance. It says it's puffed up. It's like we have to put our own wind in our sails, and we walk around and we all puffed up, and that's just arrogant. And when you mention arrogance, or I mention arrogance, man, you come and somebody comes in your mind, and guess what? It's not you. But someone comes to mind that they're always exaggerating their importance. They're always exaggerating who they think they really are. And to make me more important implies something very, very, very strong. For me to think that I'm the more important and to be arrogant and boast, you know what I'm implying? That you're less important. And that's not really loving, is it? That's not really loving. In fact, I call that being rude. That when I elevate my importance to the cost of your value and devalue you, lessen your importance, that's really being rude. My son this week, we had to get on him in a way, and we did it in more of an aggressive way because he left some toys on the stairs, and one of our kids kind of took a tumble. And in that moment, you panic. And we said some words, we're not yellers, but we said it more strongly than we have talked to him in the past, or even correct him in general. And he was very hurt by it. And not that correcting him was bad, but I talked to him later. He goes, "Dad, I just don't really feel like I'm important to you." Oh, you know what? Correction, was it needed? Yes. But should I have taken away his importance? No. Now, to certain people, they respond certain ways, and he's just got a sensitive heart. That just knowing that I'm disappointed in him is punishment enough. But at that moment, in my panic, we kind of escalated our voices, not at a yelling, but more than normal. But he took it as, and this is the important thing, he took it as, "Dad, I just didn't feel important." And for a 6-year-old to tell me that, to say that blew my mind for one thing, but it also let me know a little bit about how we feel when people are rude to us. If you work in customer service, you know this. That people will elevate their importance, and what they'll do is they'll take away from your importance. "Can't you do this? Don't you have?" Or "Why can't you?" And "Are you not?" And they just devalue you in order to elevate them. That's what being rude is. You know, if you're, as a kid, maybe adults were rude to you because as a child, they just wanted to make sure you knew that you're less important than they were. Ladies, maybe you felt less important amongst our society in certain areas and in certain respects in which men have elevated their importance and robbed you of your value and importance. Maybe you're of a different race and you feel people have acted rudely to you because you're a black African American or you're Asian or you're Hispanic, and all of a sudden people devalue you and lessen your importance based on that, and they make themselves feel more important. Maybe it's not because just of that. Maybe it's because of religious preference. Maybe you don't see yourself as a Christian, and you've seen Christians come and interact with you, and you're a waitress or a waiter. And I hate to say it, but Christians do not have great reputations among waitresses and waiters. Because maybe you felt like Christians because of the religious belief, or because they felt like they were entitled to something, or who knows what the reason is. But they devalued you, or they lessened your importance. And the bottom line is they treated you as less important than they are. Now, I believe every one of us feels that at some level. We all can go to an instance, probably this week, where someone was rude to you. And in that, this is what happened. See, they took something away from you. And that's what being rude is. Write this in. See, being rude robs others of their importance by elevating my importance. That's what being rude does. It takes away your value, your worth, by elevating my worth. Now, we've all had that done to us, but I want to turn the question on to us today. When do we do this? And who do we do this to? That we rob people in our responses. That we rob people of their importance based on how we treat them. That we rob people of this thing that God has given every person that has been created. No matter what side of the political party, no matter what side or what country they're a part of or what religious belief they're a part of, that everyone has this value that is set in them by our Creator who created them and has made them in His image. And because of that, they have value and importance. And at the moment you rob that from them and you're rude, then what happens is we take away their importance, and that is not loving. That's not loving. In fact, the opposite of being rude could be stated that it's pride. That it's the reason we're not loving, it's because we're proud. We're arrogant, we're boastful. Another word to say that is we just got we're filled up with me and that pride. And the opposite of pride is humility. And I love what Rick Warren says, and he writes in Purpose Driven Life, and if you've never read it, it's a great book. He writes this in Purpose Driven Life. He says, true humility is not thinking less of yourselves, but thinking of ourselves less. It's not thinking less of yourself and becoming a doormat. It's not thinking less of yourself and devaluing yourself and thinking yourself less important. No. It's thinking of yourself less. It's thinking of others implied more. And that's exactly how Jesus came and he operated while on this earth. When he came to this earth, he was the creator of all things. Everything that you see came to existence because of his amazing, infinite, uncontainable power. You can't stop it. And he came and he put himself on this earth. And what he did when he came to this earth is he went around and he would elevate the importance of the other people in the room. And he would come and he would look at people and he would add value to them. He would take ladies who had no importance in society. And he would take them and they had no rights, no privileges, and he would elevate them. So much he elevated them that one lady that he said, hey, the story will be told wherever they share the gospel about me. This story of what a lady has done for me will be recorded in history in a time where they don't record things about women in history. And I'm going to elevate her importance. He would do this. He would take people who were untouchable and society would cast away and say unclean, and that they would excommunicate from their city and put them outside the gate as lepers. And he would go to them and he would give them something that made them feel so valuable, a touch. Can you imagine what a touch would give to somebody that hasn't been touched in years? He would elevate their importance. He would do this with the worst of the society that people hated, the people just despised. And they had no value among society. Jesus would find himself with the tax collector, adding value, spending time and eating with them. He elevated the importance of others. Did it mean that he was less important? No. But he leveraged his importance and his power. And what did he do with that? Is he used it to love. And he elevated the importance and the value of the people around him. And one day, his disciples get in an argument. One day, his disciples get in a dispute. And they start talking about who's really the most important person among us. Because all of a sudden, this kingdom that Jesus had been talking about, which was supported all of his teaching, Jesus taught about the kingdom of God. And as he went about teaching the kingdom of God, his disciples were thinking, you know what? If this is a kingdom and he's the main dude, we're part of him, that means we're going to have some power too. So which one of us is going to be like number two? So which one of us is going to be the most important person in the group? And therefore, which of us is going to be the most important person next to Jesus in our community and in his kingdom? And Jesus, overhearing their argument, says something. And it says, Luke captures this whole story. It's in Luke chapter 9. It says, an argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest, and which of them will be the most important. And Jesus, because he's Jesus, he's God, knowing their thoughts, does something that stops the crowd. He takes a little child and had him stand beside him. Now, the reason that I believe the crowd just paused was Jesus was an expert of creating these moments that would just make the crowd pause and stop and look at him and listen to him. And Jesus taking a child was one of those moments because it was the children who, along with elderly men and elderly women, and even people who were put into slavery at the time, were viewed as unvaluables or viewed as burdens. And he would take these weak burdens on society, and he took the weakest among them, because a child is less important even as an elderly person. And he said, in this society, he took that least important person that everybody in this crowd overlooked, and he puts them right next to him. In this argument that broke out, who's going to be next to you as number two, Jesus identifies it. And he says, I'm bringing in this child and putting him right next to me. And then, in this moment when it's, hush, what did he just do? He teaches them and he says to them, whoever welcomes, and I want you to circle that word welcome because that is very important in this text. It's a word that we've talked about before. That word welcome means whoever in a way gets down and extends the hand. Or whoever takes their hand and extends it and receives them. It's this beautiful, beautiful portrayal. It's the same word that John writes in that he says, whoever, he goes, that if anyone who believes in Jesus and receives Jesus, so anybody who takes the hand of Jesus, anyone who reaches out to Jesus and believes and receives what he's given to you and I, anyone who receives the gift of life, you become the children of God. And it's that same word welcomes that he uses this here. And it's like whoever extends the hand, whoever takes the hand of children, whoever includes them and says, hey, you're coming with me. Whoever looks among the crowd and sees the least of these and does this and welcomes them, includes them, accepts them, whoever welcomes the least of these. And look at this. This is important. He goes, in my name. You know what that means? It's as I've done for you. It's on the same mission as I have, with the same purpose that I have, and the same authority as I have in my name. If you take a hand of the people and include and accept and welcome the people that are the least important around you, and you do it on my mission, just as I have done to you, look what happens. Welcomes me, takes my hand. Whoever takes the hand of these kids takes my hand. And whoever welcomes me, whoever accepts me, whoever it takes me by the hand and walks with me, whoever does this, welcomes the one who sent me. And then to make the exclamation mark, for it is the one who is the least. In your argument, I'm answering this question now. Whoever's the least, like this child. Whoever's the least among you, in my kingdom, is the greatest. We look at this, and we look at this in light of this question, what does love require of us? And that's a teaching big idea for today. Love requires me to elevate the importance of others. Who are the others? Who's around you? That's the others. Who are the people in your home that kind of get overlooked and really important, they see themselves as less important? You're to elevate their importance. Who are the people around you at work that people are overlooking, that people they get just kind of walked over, and not just like the company walks over, but they just get forgotten? Who are the people in your community? Who are the people in your neighborhood that are overlooked, that society says they're not important? The people around them have said they're not important. And how does it mean that you're less important? No, but we are secure in our relationship with God, and we know what God has done for us. He's welcomed us, and what are we to do? We are to look for the least and not be rude to them. Because rude sometimes can be something that we do without even knowing that we're doing it. But we must love those that are the least. And it might be the person at work, that you love the person at work who everybody thinks is the least. And how do you add importance to them? How do you elevate the importance of the others in your life? Maybe it's at school. How do you add importance to the others at school that everybody else says they're not important? Whether it's because of their past, or it's because they don't have the same digs as you, or they live in the same neighborhood, whatever the case may be. How do we elevate the importance of others? And I began to think about this week, and I want to give you just what I came up with on a small list, a short list, of ways that we can overcome being rude. Because sometimes we do it, and we don't realize we're doing it. And so the first thing that I would say, how do we elevate the importance of others, is this right here. Don't overlook others. Don't overlook them. Acknowledge and accept them. You know, one of the most valuable things that you can do to somebody is not get so focused on your to-do list, which I'm very guilty of. Like, I'm a type A personality and a very dominant in some ways. I know I don't appear like that. But I really am. And sometimes I can get so focused on a task that I can walk by 10 people and not even say hi. Now, am I being rude? Intentionally, no, but what is that being perceived as? And it's happened to you. It's happened to me. How rude. How do I elevate the importance of others? By just looking at them. I love companies who elevate this value in their company, and they make a rule by it, a bare minimum, that you have to address everybody by name. I know you might hate that, but I love that. Because it helps us see the value of others enough that we're going to address people and look them in the eye and not look over them. But how do you do this? Who's that person in your office that is overlooked? Who's the person that at that meeting never gets a voice? And maybe you run the meeting and you can say, hey, Bill, you know what? I know everybody else has had a turn to talk. We haven't heard from you today. I want to give you the opportunity right now. What do you have to say? How do we not overlook them? And how do we acknowledge them? And how do we include them and accept them as part of who we are, to where we can take them by the hand and welcome them? How do we do this with the people that our society cast away. How do we do this with your neighborhood? How do you not overlook your neighbor that everybody kind of talks about, and they kind of just look over him and they go their way? But how do you elevate that person's importance? And then secondly, I believe this is important, that when we have the opportunity, we need to praise others publicly, but confront and correct them privately. There's nothing more rude than to correct somebody publicly. There's nothing more rude than to confront somebody in public. Public is where we praise. And if you want to elevate somebody and add value to them, then you praise them publicly. Then you give your kids public praise. Don't be the parent at the ball game that is constantly, why can't you ever do anything right? And they're yelling at the kid, and we've all seen that parent. Maybe you are that parent. But we do that. We correct them and we yell at them. And maybe it's at work. Don't correct publicly. Praise them publicly. Elevate them. Puff them up publicly. And when you do have to admonish, and when you do have to correct, and you do have to redirect, do it privately. And when you do confront them, and you do have to correct them, I want you to remember this. Criticize what? Not who. Criticize what? Not who. What do I mean by that? Is whenever you have to address that student, don't attack their character. Don't attack them as a person. Address the behavior. Sometimes what we do is we start to address them as a person, and whenever you attack and you criticize, you confront, and you correct them as a person and don't correct the behavior, what you do is you devalue them. So what you can do is you lead in with the behavior. You lean into the behavior. You lean into the action. And say, you know what? Hey, you're not stupid. You're not ignorant. And I know that you can do this, but the way that you are going about this and not turning your paper in, it's really hurting, and I want to help you. And you can use this, but address behaviors and don't address the person's value. And when you come and we come out, and maybe a parent was like this to you, and they called you names and they devalued you, what did that do to you? And your sense of self-worth. It eliminated it. And as Christ followers, we have an obligation not to be rude, because being rude is not loving. And the loving thing to do is add value. And you can add value to others while correcting them. You can add value to others while criticizing them. And here's one thing. If you're criticizing somebody and you're not part of the solution, guess what you are? A gossip. I say that in love. Don't criticize unless you're willing to step in and be part of the solution. That means when you come in with a critical thing and you say, hey, I'm really critical, but I think we should do it this way, and how can I help you make this situation better? When you criticize by creating a solution, you are adding value to the person while correcting the problem, or correcting the behavior, or correcting what needs to be corrected. But when you criticize, don't criticize the person, and don't criticize them without them there, but be part of the solution, because criticism without being a part of the solution is only being a gossip. And that's not loving. In fact, that takes value away. And what we are required is to elevate the value of people. Why? Because that's exactly what Jesus did for you and I. Whenever we were forgotten and really were on our own to be right with God, which every one of us, there's no way that we could meet that bare minimum of that law. There's no way. I don't care how good you are. There's no way. I don't care how bad you are. There is no way that you can make up for all those things. There's no way that you can match all those things that are required to be in right standing with God and be in right standing with each other. But Jesus, in his love for you and I, you know what he did? He came and he entered this world, and he came into this world in the most humble way. Not thinking less of himself, but thinking of himself less. And what's he do? Is he takes the form of a human being, but even lowers himself and becomes the servant, the bottom of the line to you and I. And what does he do and how does he serve us? He gives his life for us. And he says this to you and I, as I have loved you. You are required. Not you get the choice. You are required to love one another. Not robbing the importance and the value away from them, but to elevate their importance, just as I have done for you. So the question to you today is, as you go this week, can you ask this question, what does love require of me? And in those moments where you're in the room and there are others present, what does love require of me to elevate the importance of them? Doesn't mean I'm less important. And it doesn't mean that truth shouldn't be stated. But it means that in the midst of the correction or the midst of what action needs to be taken, that I elevate their importance when I address them or just need to acknowledge them. What would it look like if that happens? Well, this is what I believe. When we elevate the importance of others, we elevate Jesus. What's it look like when a church elevates the importance of others? We make Jesus more famous. What happens when Christ's followers all over this city and in our schools as teachers and as administrators and as kids in public schools or kids in city areas or working in government capacities, or you're maybe working in a corporation as an employee, an employer on that side, or you manage a system. But what if we, in all of us together, had one goal? That we're going to elevate Jesus by loving others. And we're going to show God how much we appreciate him by showing him how much we love others. And one of the ways, simple ways that we can love others is just elevate their importance. How do we do that? And what happens when that happens? I believe that in those moments, people see Jesus in us. And one day, maybe, they too will put their trust in him because you gave them a taste of Jesus' love towards them. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you. Thank you that you